unfortunately, 99% of our life is just a mystery. It's
Hmm.
unknown. You didn't know that COVID was going to happen. All the positions to your portfolio, you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. And
No.
so that idea i- is much bigger, right? We could revisit this and we could go down a deep well for decades talking about that singular concept. But the fact is that this life, most of it is a mystery. It's a leap off into the unknown.
Hmm.
And you have to develop once again, relationship with that. Because if not, you're going to continue to fight. You're going to hope you get your relationships perfect. You're going to hope you get the perfect bank account, the perfect house, everything figured out and aligned just to your liking. And then guess what? Something's going to happen. It's going to fall on your plate. So you've got to learn to get used to that. And
Hmm.
unfortunately, that's one of the challenges of this human experience is how do you actually end up both being aware of that and then getting comfortable enough in that. And I
Hmm.
think that's a lifelong process. It's a lifelong journey to stay in that.
Welcome to Talking Billions. We talk about big ideas, big inspirations, big topics. We take on the hardest topic of all, money. How to make it, save it, keep it. But our conversations lead us to an even bigger question, what it means to live a rich life beyond money. My guests share their practices, principles, and evergreen wisdom. I'm your host, Bogumil Baranowski, author, TEDx speaker, and investment advisor to wealth creators with patient capital and an infinite investment horizon. I work with families and individuals who aspire to grow wealth over a lifetime and generations through disciplined, thoughtful investments in durable quality businesses while giving money meaning. Join me on this quest to unearth and share the wisdom of the ages. Let me share with you the podcast program disclosure statement. Blue Infinitas Capital LLC is a registered investment advisor, and the opinions expressed by the firm's employees and podcast guests on the show are their own and do not reflect the opinions of Blue Infinitas Capital. All the statements and opinions expressed are based upon information considered reliable, although it should not be relied upon as such. Any statements or opinions are subject to change without notice. The information presented is for educational purposes only and does not intend to make an offer or solicitation for the sale or purchase of any specific securities, investments, or investment strategies. Investments involve risk and, unless otherwise stated, are not guaranteed. The information expressed does not take into account your specific situation or objectives and is not intended as recommendations appropriate for any individual. Listeners are encouraged to seek advice from a qualified tax, legal, or investment advisor to determine whether any information presented may be suitable for their specific situation. Past performance is not indicative of future performance. None of what you're about to hear is investment advice. My guest today is Sean Delaney. He's an executive coach and author who helps high achievers uncover deeper purpose and navigate the challenges of leadership, resilience, and self-mastery. With nearly 15 years of experience guiding CEOs, executives, and professional athletes, he blends profound insights with practical strategies to inspire meaningful, lasting change. He earlier wrote Masterpiece in Progress, a daily guide to a life well-crafted, and Insights of the Ages quotes for a life well-crafted. He just published another book, When Life Begins to Whisper, A Journey Beyond the Answers, and he is here with me today to talk about that book and more. How are you, Sean? So nice to see you.
Yeah, it's so nice to see that smiling face of yours. I'm doing well.
Well, I told you that I had a certain experience with your book, and I was reading it, and it's poems, so it's different. And I would pause at different points of the book, and I felt like I had no control over where I pause. It just made me pause. And these are the moments I want to bring up with you today. So I think everybody that reads the book will have their own experience, but I want the audience to have a flavor of what they will find in the book. And I do want to say that Sean was on the show about a year ago, so I highly recommend going back and listening to that episode together with this one, before or after, however you like it. But Sean, I hardly ever ask my guests about the titles of the books, although I'm always curious. And I'm curious especially about your book. How did this title come about?
I played with a couple different titles, all around similar themes, of course. And I stuck with this When Life Begins to Whisper because I feel like we all kind of hear that faint inner crackling, that little fire inside. And it's so subtle at times. And what I mean by that is you might be in a relationship, you know it's really not the one for you. You're in a job and a career that just doesn't feel like it really ignites your soul. And so there are these little signs, these little internal nudges. And I picture them as, life beginning to whisper. You hear those subtle calls, but so often we ignore them. And then, we look back 10 years and we go, wow, that went really fast. I didn't think I was going to end up here. So this book is really about that. It's about those people who want to go inside, meaning explore their inner landscape and listen and see what those little whispers are about. So that's the first part of the title. The second part, A Journey Beyond Answers. I think we so want, especially in the investing world, right? We want black and whites. We want it to fit perfectly in the Excel sheet. And I think we know that life does not have defined answers. There's no arrival point. We're not going to get to this destination. Everything's going to be perfect. And so the deepest questions in life, they're unanswerable. So can we learn to live in the mystery, in the ambiguity, into the unknown? And that's what I wanted to explore with this work and this book, because I think it's a really important and vital step to be able to get to not need an answer, to not need a defined path right in front of you. It's funny when you think about experiences like awe and beauty, it comes from the dark. It's completely unknown. It's unexpected. And even the artwork of the book, I had it, for anyone who's watching it, I have the tree growing out of the dark into the light. And that's, I think, a great metaphor, because the great life is going to come from the dark, going to come from those painful periods. So I wanted people to understand that and to experience that. And I have a unique perspective doing this work with people behind the scenes. When I work with someone, a lot of times someone in the investment space will come to me. They want to be able to think, clearer, be more productive, all of those surface level things. Then we start the work and we realize it's about something different. And so what we really want to explore is, how do you handle that unknown? How do you handle the mystery? How do you handle those dark periods and use them for growth? So I know, long-winded way to answer how I titled it. But that was kind of the thinking behind both the title and then the artwork for the book.
When I read it, I'll tell you what I was thinking. When you talk about the whisper, I was thinking how if you just pay attention for a second, right? There's certain things that can come up. If you just pay attention to the experience, whatever is happening, work, investing, life, anything. And then I like going beyond the answers, because I think we go into many fields thinking there's a checklist, like tell me 3 things I should do, and then I'll know I'll be happy or I'll be successful or whatever it is. And then we realize that it's a much more nuanced way of getting there. And when I listen to investors that have been investing for decades, you clearly see that they went in with a certain formula. Even Buffett went in with a certain formula that he borrowed from Ben Graham. And then he realized it's a much more nuanced way of navigating the markets and finding opportunities and getting comfortable with the fact that it's not going to be 1, 2, 3. It's an interesting revelation. There's a quote early in one of those early poems in your book that I want to bring up. You say, I realize that not all journeys need a destination. Sometimes it's enough to simply walk and be. It still gives me chills reading that. What were you thinking when you wrote that?
Well, I mean, I'd love to hear about your experience with that, but going into that, I think we're on that perpetual hamster wheel, and velocity is just not going to be the answer to more complexity. We think it is. Let's go faster. Let's add more, let's speed this up. And what we want to do, especially in the investing space, is you got to be able to find that still point. Mm-hmm. You got to be able to sit and be, and I think so often we just continue to move and move and move, and we realize that that's not the answer. And so we can settle in and understand that quietness, that stillness, that state of being for us, where we can find enough in that space right there. I think that's really important. I want to tie this back to investing again and again, but sometimes it's not, reading the next book, listening to the next interview. It might be, going out and surfing the waves for a little while in that afternoon, where you bring yourself back into that present moment and you remember how to be. So many of the things we're trying to do is to try to figure out how to navigate this life a bit more successfully. And if you can't sit and be with yourself for a few minutes and find some peace there, then there's some work to do. And so that was kind of the impetus to that. But what was your experience reading that?
I was thinking how we're obsessed with the destination. I mean, I want to have that many $1 million, or I want to have that title, or I want to have a corner office. And once I get there, everything will be fine. So that was my first thought. And the being part, it's fascinating because I think you might know that about me, that I spend a lot of time in my head. I think a lot of people listening to this podcast could relate to that. That if you spend a lot of time in your head, this is the only place that you think you will find the answers, and then you realize, no, it's helpful to just be and leave that mind. And I find those moments when I'm trying to solve a problem for a client or an investment case, and I run to a wall that feels almost like a physical wall. I just can't get past that wall. And working harder, in the sense I'm going to put in another 5 hours this evening on it, it's not going to get me there. But as you mentioned, leaving the house, going for a walk, getting into the water, whatever it is that works for you, and coming back with a different perspective, and sometimes maybe with a better answer than you would have come up with just sitting more at a desk or at your laptop. So I think that those two things spoke to me, and I realized, one, it's not just a destination in terms of some sort of an accomplishment, even financially speaking. And the second thing is just getting out of your head for a moment and realizing there are other ways to perceive the world, and there are other ways to find the answers, and just letting go of that grip.
I mean, you nailed it, right? So many of us, we think you get that number in the bank account, you get that external accolade, and it's going to fulfill the question mark in here. And if you can't fulfill this on your own, no external accolade will ever do that. I know you, I had a group presentation, and I bring up the example of Matt Damon winning the Oscar at 28. Mm-hmm. And he shares this in an interview, and he's back in his hotel room, and he goes, imagine, being 70 or 80. I worked your whole career to get this moment, this statue, and realize it's not enough. It is not enough. And so I think that's a real refresher and a wake up that you need to start understanding a different way of being, of finding the joy in the craft. I know I mentioned a minute ago that sometimes it's getting out of the office, going to hit the waves. I'm not saying there aren't times to pick up the intensity and put in that work. But what I'm trying to say is you need to be in that centered state of being, where the work, like you were saying, you get much fresher insights while you're doing it, as opposed to pounding your head against the wall.
Well, as you know, I work with affluent families, and I've learned a lot spending time with them. And I have this realization that money has a certain purpose and meaning and context, and it's just not just a number. And for somebody else, a smaller amount can be life-changing. For somebody different, a much larger amount, it makes no difference, right? So it's much more nuanced what that money is and what kind of an impact it can have. In my work, I can't just focus on the investment side, trying to grow 1 million into 2. I'm just fascinated with the human aspect of it. What does this money mean to you? And speaking of destination, let's say we sit down and we put down on a piece of paper a goal, but I immediately know that this is just the beginning of a much more interesting conversation. Once we get there, I know other things will come up, and it will have an impact on your family, on your life partner, and so on. And I think just being aware of it, I think it motivates me. It's an extra motivation for me in terms of trying to grow that wealth or keep that wealth. On the other hand, I feel like I can help so much more, given that I understand a bit more what kind of an impact that some, so to speak, destination has on their life. But it's a fascinating topic. I have another quote I want to bring up. And you talk about pain. And the big part of the early quarter of the book is about pain. And I'll share this quote and we'll talk more about it. You say, pain doesn't come to break you, it comes to open you. And I really stopped when I read it, because I'll tell you in a second, but I feel like we're trying to run away from pain, but you're inviting us to look at pain in a different way. But I'm curious, what were you thinking when you wrote those words?
Yeah, it's really about cultivating a different relationship with pain. Mm-hmm. Pain is going to be an inevitability, right? There's no getting through this life without pain. And so if we continually push it away, try to avoid it, or have such an adverse reaction when it comes into our life, we're not going to be able to do anything with it. So a real question is, what are you going to do with your pain? Mm-hmm. What is the next step? And so if we can start allowing the pain in, I don't say invite pain, say, come on, pain, I want to experience pain. But when it's there, instead of going that downward cycle of just trying to fight it, say, what does it have to teach me? What can I learn in this moment? And the real interesting thing, I'm assuming, Bogomil, if you look back over your last 20 years and you look at some of the most painful moments, whether they be investing in personal, and I'm speaking for myself as well, the moments that I ended up having the most joy or the most knowledge or insights, or let's call it pride, they happened because of moments of adversity or pain or challenges. And so it's really about when you're going to face that storm, who are you going to be when you come out of it? And certain people, they go one direction where they allow the pain to completely dismantle them and they stay down that path forever. But you can allow pain to open up new insights for you, open up new levels of love, all of these elements if you change your relationship with pain. And so I think the people who evolve the fastest, they've cultivated this different type of relationship with pain because there's no avoiding it. So you might as well learn to get comfortable with it and then understand how you can use it to move you forward. So that's why I spend so much time talking about that cycle of pain, because it's, like I said, I get to see underneath the hood, essentially, of a lot of these people. And many of these people, public figures, they have an exterior. And then you go behind the closed doors and you realize what's actually happening. And all of them are experiencing pain. Every single person, almost 15 years, there's not one person that hasn't come to me with immense pain at periods of their life. Mm-hmm. And so what do we want to do with this? And so if you can really cultivate and develop that skill to stay in pain and learn from it, all of a sudden you are going completely a different direction, in a positive direction. And then how do we apply this to investing? I think of this as tension, painful periods, right? Or holding two contradictory ideas in our head at the same time. How do you stay in that tension point? You know, when you feel that tension, are you going to run? Are you going to hide from it? Or can you develop the capacity to stay in it, to stay in that mystery, to stay in the unknown, to stay in the pain, and see what you can learn there? Because so often our greatest insight is right on the other side of that pain period. Mm-hmm. And so you look at anyone who's 60, 70, 80 and has the longevity to stay through those periods, they have a different relationship with pain.
I love it. When I hear the word pain, I'm thinking of actual physical pain and the pain that you describe. And we use the same word, right? There's a physical pain. If you just dropped a brick on your toe, unquestionably, you're going to feel something. And most likely you might even scream, right? It's pain. And then there's a pain that's either emotional or mental or psychological that happens. And reading that part of your book, I was thinking about the nature of that pain. Because until I tell you that I'm in that kind of pain, you wouldn't be able to tell. Maybe my body language, maybe I'm smiling less, whatever else. You would pick up on something that's off, but you wouldn't know I'm experiencing pain. So it's fascinating that where does this pain exist, right? It's not physical, and it's not really something that other people can observe, other people can participate unless they ask questions and they want to help or whatever way they want to address it with you. But what I was thinking when I was reading that is, and maybe I narrow it down for a second, pain is receiving something you didn't want or circumstances developing in a way you didn't want. That's one of the sources of this kind of pain. And when you talk about investing, you bought something at $100 and now the stock is down half off, 50. So you could experience pain of a loss, even if it's a paper loss. For the time being, it's a loss. And it's fascinating how you can navigate those emotions because they can get in the way of actually successfully managing money. For example, if you only focus on the fact that, wow, this is really painful. I met a lot of people that sold private businesses and they're sitting on a substantial capital and they think that they'll dabble in the stock market, which is fascinating because they go from a place where they were managing a business and they were only watching the profits and the revenue coming in, and now they're looking at a portfolio that moves up and down every day. And for lack of a better word, the pain that comes with it, that they personally experience, is something they can't even tolerate, to the point that they say they don't know how to deal with it. So it's fascinating how we experience certain things in different ways, and two different people might be looking at the same thing. One experiences excruciating pain and discomfort, and the other one takes advantage of the situation like a value investor and goes in and buys something because it's half off, right? So it's not an absolute.
Sure. I want to touch on something you said a minute ago, and that's talking about, if people are just focusing on the pain or the tension when holding an investment, it's down. You could have the greatest investing mind of all time. If that pain is creating internal obstacles or blockers, you don't have access to your greatest resource. And so it really is about stilling those internal waters, learning how to sit in the pain, in the tension, to allow that debris to settle. If you can't do that, you don't have the full access to your capabilities. All of those insights, all of those, annual letters you've read, all of that, you don't have full access to. And so I think one of the main skills that you can develop as an entrepreneur, as an investor, is how do you calm your internal water so you have access to that full brain you have? Because if not, then you're working at half capacity, without a doubt. I've seen this pattern again and again. And so it's really about calming those waters to be able to see with clarity.
I love that. I have another quote. You write, I finally understood that this night was not the absence of day. It was the presence of everything I had been afraid to face, with the emphasis on the things you're afraid to face. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. I mean, all of us, I'm sure, we push things under the surface, meaning internally. We don't want to face a difficult conversation, thinking about career, thinking about relationship, whatever it is for you. I know everyone has things like that they don't want to face. And so we push down beneath the surface, thinking that they'll disappear. But it's like pushing that beach ball, right? The further you push, the more velocity and intensity it's going to bring to the surface. And so, it's one of those midnight moments, where all of a sudden things get quiet and whoa, this is what's going on with my life. Renee Shar said that, midnight is not in every man's reach, meaning so many people don't want to face that midnight moment. But until you face that midnight moment to alleviate the tension in that beach ball you've been pushing down, meaning all of the thoughts, all of the emotions, then all of a sudden you're living a life that's not yours. And so you need to find those times that you allow those painful thoughts, those painful emotions to come to the surface. I found something really interesting. A few years ago, I was sitting down with Howard Marks. So a lot of us will look to Howard as just one of the greatest thinkers. And so the question I asked him is, what's the most important thing in investing? And he brings up the sign at the Oracle of Delphi, know thyself. Because I've been doing this 50 years. It's the most important insight I have, know thyself. If you are unwilling to face your midnight moments, meaning all of those inner disturbances, you don't know yourself. You're fooling yourself. And so to develop that relationship with yourself where you start to see clearer, you need to allow all of those things you've been pushing underneath the surface that you thought would disappear up. And that comes up in the silence. And that silence, that's why I said it's the presence of everything, all of a sudden starts to come up. And when I say this isn't about fighting those emotions. I think there's a major issue with a lot of self-help or a lot of coaching. Like I was saying a few minutes ago, we think velocity is the answer to complexity. Let me attack these problems harder. And I think it's different. It's more about slowly allowing up and not fighting them and just settling in and having a softer approach to it. And so that's going to be really important. So that was the idea behind it. And yeah, I've got to look at my own inner experiences where those moments come, you kind of wake up in the middle of the night and it's, whoa, I didn't know I was experiencing that. And I've seen this again and again, a decade plus. It'll be really interesting when you finally get someone to really quiet down and come into their own silence and stillness, settle their internal waters. I can ask the most basic question and all of a sudden they erupt in emotion, meaning actual tears, because they were holding it back. And what they realize is after periods like that, after those midnight type moments, if you can allow that to come up and then work with it, it's like a massive weight's been lifted off your back. And that's why I brought up Marx earlier, because I think he sees that you have to allow that weight to be let off your back in order to see clearly.
We almost don't have moments like that in our lives because we're so busy. There's so much going on. And in a way, I think it's a great excuse not to address it and fill up the day with more commitments and more tasks and never have those moments that sneak up on you, as you said, at midnight when we wake up or we fall asleep. And that silence, it's a scary place to be because you can actually hear something you haven't been willing to listen to for a while. But if you do, something interesting can happen. And we talked about pain, but here this moment of revelation can be a path to a new discovery as well.
Yeah, well, I think you're bringing up there's an intentionality element to this. So you can think about finding some of those micro moments throughout the day just to slow down, even if it's for a minute or two. What I see a lot of people do is they schedule the back to back to back to back to back meetings, right? Or you're going from one thing to another. And all of a sudden, let's build in 5-minute gap. So you can just calm down for a minute. So I think about that in the micro moments. And a lot of times we'll work on being very intentional with how you start your day. So right before getting into the vortex, 2 to 3 minutes, slow your breathing, settle in, get really clear. And all of a sudden that starts training the capacity, the ability just to slow down for a minute. So that would be a micro way of doing that. And then you can kind of think these longer periods. So we're in the new year here. You know, a big thing that I do is the end of the year type reflections and reviews. You need some of these longer type or these further spaced apart, meaning quarterly, annually periods where you really reflect, where you really slow down, where you can set a whole new direction. But it's very hard to do that if you don't work in the micro moments. So each day you can condense that down or go out a little bit further each week, each month, and develop the capacity. It's almost like training a muscle or a new skill to get used to being in silence a little bit.
You brought up earlier living a life that's not yours, something along those lines. And there's a quote that I want to bring up that ties back to it. You say, "I wander through my days like a ghost chained to its forgotten grave, bound to a life that no longer has a pulse." And then you add, "The real prison is living a life that doesn't belong to you." Tell me about that revelation.
So that one specifically, less of a revelation, more of a seeing. I actually wrote that after a session with a client. So one of the things I do is I try to get inside their inner landscape as much as possible, right? What I mean by that is I can't apply effective tools or ideas if I don't understand what's happening for them internally. So actually a number of these poems for me, part of my process after I've done a session is I'm trying to, find clarity for them, is I try to enter their inner world. So that came actually, it's a guy in finance, very successful, beyond successful, 22 plus years in the industry. And he literally goes, "I've been faking this every single day. I have been faking this every single day." And now he's got absolute golden handcuffs, right? And he goes, "I'm just drift walking through life. I'm just asleep through this life. I feel like I don't even have a pulse." And that is one of the most pervasive problems I see in the people I work with. They feel they are being untrue to, call it your soul, call it your deepest self, your inner truth, whatever words encapsulate that for you, because everyone knows what I'm talking about. You're following someone else's script, someone else's plans, whether it's passed down from parents, teachers, expectations on social media, whatever it is. You're following someone else's script. You're walking a different path that is not aligned with yours. And so it's a visceral experience for people. They feel those depth of emotions, like they're tied and tethered to a grave. They've got those gray eyes. They are sleepwalking through life. And it's just, like I said, so pervasive. And it makes me think of Bonnie Ware, the palliative care nurse. She wrote the book, The 5 Regrets of the Dying. Number one, she's interviewed thousands of people on their deathbed. The number one regret of them is, "I wish I had had the courage to live a life true to myself, not what others expected." And I think so much about alleviating that tension and creating alignment with who you are and what you feel at your deepest core. Because if you're not doing that, if you're not getting closer to that alignment, then it does not matter how much sleep you're getting, how much coffee you're drinking, your energy is being absolutely dissipated and you are continually fighting yourself. And I think that's when you see the greatest performers. Doesn't matter if you're investing, business, the arts, sports, they've merged and they found that deep alignment, the unobstructed, authentic self. I use this analogy a lot. You look at the best coaches across sports. So I'll bring up Phil Jackson. He coached the Chicago Bulls, the Kobe and Shaq Lakers. Then you take someone like Bill Belichick, who coached in football, the Patriots. You can think of any other coach. Every one of those coaches who's won multiple championships and can be regarded as one of the greatest coaches. We can throw in John Wooden as well. Vastly different styles. Vastly different styles. All got to the top. Vastly different styles. And I say the reason is they understood alignment. They coupled a game that they were obsessed with with who they are at their core, and they merge those two. I was listening to, this was a year ago, so I might get this somewhat wrong. It was Ray Dalio and Deepak Chopra. And Chopra asked Dalio about like picking to be an investor. And he's like, I didn't pick this. He's like, I fell in love with this game and there just happened to be amazing upside. He's like, but I couldn't have faked this. I can't be doing this for 60 years if I hated this craft. And I see again and again people who have slowly followed that path that's not theirs. And as you go further down, it hurts more and more. So that was the reason behind the writing of that poem, because it's something I see again and again.
Well, I love the sound of it, and it's very relatable. And you know well that I had to be an investor. There was nothing else I could do, and it was just how, in what form or shape it's going to express itself. I was reading Al Pacino's book, and I'm a big fan of his work. I find it fascinating. He's been so successful for so many decades. But reading his book, he talks about his childhood and the early days, which is something I asked my guests on this podcast, and I asked you in the episode we recorded a year ago. But reading it, you see this, he's in his 80s now, I think. But you see this teenager that fell in love with being on stage and performing and taking on the roles and being in character. He just loves the experience. He just happened to meet the right people that put him in the right movies and made him a movie success and a financial success. And there's a whole story how he ran into some issues on the financial side, as many people do, because he wasn't paying attention or he didn't have somebody to pay attention for him, either way. But you see somebody that fell in love with the craft, right? And as you said, and Dalio probably tells the same story, he wouldn't be able to do it for 60 years and fake it, right? At some point, you say, this is not for me. The fact that you're doing it for so long, like Buffett is doing it all the way to his 90s and Munger all the way almost to 100, they just love it. And if you find something that you love, it's a very special place to be. And I'm not saying it's easy. And it brings me to another quote that you have that's related to that. You say, the life you're searching for begins the moment you stop running from yourself. Is that where you're going with it?
Yeah, that's a tie into that, right? As long as it's, you can run. And I think I even say this in one of the poems, like you can run till your feet are raw. You're always going to have to face the mirror. It's like I talk about with the book, The 5 Regrets of the Dying. They got to their deathbed and they say, 70 years and man, this hurts. This really hurts. And so can we use that wisdom of people on their deathbed to say, all right, wherever we're at currently, doesn't matter whether you're 18, 32, 42, I know what's my truth, and let me slowly start taking steps in that direction, because I don't want to get to 75, 85 and have those same type of regrets. So yeah, that's a tie in there.
Well, speaking of those regrets, I had Dr. Jordan Grummett on the show, who is a hospice doctor, who talks about the topics you bring up, how the people he worked with that end up in a hospice, they have this moment where they realize they have limited time, which we all do, but we don't think about it when you really, really think about it. But they have a limited time. And then they have this sudden moment of clarity. These are the things I really have to do now. And these are the things I really want to do. And he basically shares how, why wouldn't we be able to replicate that experience before this moment of inevitable death coming to us, where we sit down and we realize, listen, this time is precious. Why wouldn't I be doing exactly what I'm supposed to be doing instead of waiting until much later to have that realization? And in his stories, he tells how people that were supposed to pass away, they get so busy with their life that they live a lot longer, or whatever the condition was actually was not as bad as they thought, fortunately, luckily. And because they got busy living their lives, finally, because of this alarm clock in their life that woke them up and made them realize, this is the only life you have. Why not do it now? Why wait?
Can we stay on that theme for a second? Yeah, you bring up, Mary Oliver's got that great poem, what are you going to do with this one precious life of yours? And so after a very close death, I kind of had one of those visceral type experiences like, yeah, this is running out and this is super precious and I don't know when this is going to happen. And so you really want to fast forward to the end of your life and, all right, like those people in the 5 Regrets of Dying? What is going to make for a deeply meaningful life for me? And so I actually now condense this. I think about collapsing the timeline. I know at least how I'm going to answer now what I think will be the most important elements of my life. So how about I collapse the timeline and spend as much time trying to cultivate and develop those relationships or those experiences, those elements that I think are most important for my life. And so the way I do this practically is I've really thought about that. So it comes down, at least for this year, this is the focus for me. It's essentially deepening and expanding my closest relationships. And I'm thinking about like those 1000x relationships, not 1 or 2%. I'm talking about like the people who matter most to me. Deepen and expand those relationships. Did I flow authentically, right? Back to, did I have the courage to live a life that's true to me, not someone else's? Am I living my life? And then, am I leaving this place better? And so for me, I have a daily centering and an end of day reflection. And those are the focuses. Am I living in alignment with that? And I really condense that down even more. So each day, what's the specific action I'm taking towards those things? That way, I'm keeping the main thing, the main thing. And that doesn't mean I won't course correct, meaning I get, 3 years down the road and say, you know what, this element of my life has changed. You add that in. But what I'm saying is at this moment in time, to me, these are the most important elements of what I think of as a great life. And so I'm going to combine my mindsets, my thoughts, my words, and more importantly, my actions in alignment towards those things. And that doesn't happen unless what? You give yourself some of that quiet, some of that silence, some of that solitude. And that's why it's so important to have those times both throughout the day and then some of those bigger expanded periods we talked about, like a quarterly review or end of year review. And that's some of the fruitfulness that comes from those.
No, I love the sound of that. Every year it's helpful to sit down and think what's important to you. And I like this idea of stepping away from the daily routine and creating that space to actually think about it, because we can get lost in the rhythm of everyday activity and not find that opportunity. As I was listening to you and we were talking about time and death, I spoke with Oliver Burkeman, who wrote a few books about time. And I asked him a question I ask now and then. His books are about the fact that our time is limited, that many weeks that we have. And I said, Oliver, for a second, if you could imagine that we can live forever, have an immortal life, what changes? And we had a fascinating conversation about it. And as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking, we do live our lives as if we were immortal, as if there was an unlimited number of tomorrows. I want to pursue this hobby, but I'm going to do it next year. I want to change careers, but I'm going to do it next year, right? We feel like there's always a tomorrow. But I think it's refreshing to remember that there's only that many tomorrows. And
yeah, I mean, I'd push back on that. I would say at points in our life, 100%, you think this is going to go on forever. And until you have that midnight moment we were talking about before, where you go, whoa, this isn't going on forever. And you see some of those people start to exit your life. And so you can bring this type of awareness, this type of visceral awareness into how precious this is into your day-to-day awareness. And so what I mean for that, I really will picture after my kids go to bed, what happens if they don't wake up tomorrow, and use that as a forcing function towards intentionality and presence with them. And as an athlete, so I'll work with a number of athletes, what happens if tomorrow you go out there and you shatter your knee, you don't get this opportunity again? How are you showing up today? And so I agree, there's periods that we think this is going to go on forever, but I think that's not the right way to live. You've got to bring the intensity and the presence into today. If you're not doing that, then you're just coasting through life. And so I would say, yes, that's going to happen. But how do we collapse the timeline to bring that type of intentional living, that type of presence right now, right here? I say eternal time is found in an eternal presence, right? Those times we completely lose track of time only happens when we are deeply present. And so we need to bring that back into those small moments, but being aware of what's most important and understand that's going to be fleeting. And you got to bring that into your awareness continually.
Time is a funny thing. The more I think about it and the more I ask people about it, the more fascinating it is how, the way we perceive it, even as you said, there are moments that it feels like if I asked you, how long were you I don't know, writing your poem, you would not even know how long. Was it 2 hours or 5 hours or 10 hours? Because you were so lost in the process, in your craft. You know, when I'm reading some research or finding a new idea, I'm completely lost. And the only way I know that it's late is because the sun went down and I realize I must have been reading this for longer than I thought. So there are moments when you get completely lost, and asking somebody how much time. Well, for me, no time at all. If you were watching me, you would have thought that I've been sitting and working on something for 10 hours. But for me, it was just a moment. So it's funny how we perceive those things. But I like the idea of bringing those things, you say, collapsing that time. This is the moment to make the decisions. I want to bring up a quote that relates to that really spoke to me. You said that the truth was buried so deep inside me, I had forgotten where I had hidden it. And I realized that those moments that you talk about, it's that opportunity to find those buried truths that are somewhere in there, but they're there.
Mm-hmm. I mean, at first you need a type of an awakening type moment, something to rustle your feathers, you know, where you start that exploration and say, where are those truths? You know, because it's so easy to fall into complacency, you know, piling up those numbers in the bank account or this accolade or this new purchase. And so those truths, though, you know, we talk about that alignment of a life that is deeply true to you. It's in there. But if you don't start the journey searching, you're never going to find those. And we've all found our times or ourselves at moments in our life where, you know what, we buried that truth pretty deeply. And sometimes it's, whoa, will I ever find that again? But I haven't found one person when they start that exploration, they haven't gotten closer to that. That's for sure.
There's a moment of awakening. And I have another quote. You say, the emptiness you feared is not an end, but the purest form of possibility, a canvas where light has yet to decide how it will paint existence. There's this moment where we just don't know what's next. And, you know, people say if you're a writer, an author, you look at the blank page, the first page of the book, there's nothing there, or a paint or a canvas or whatever it is, a portfolio, you know, it's all in cash. I don't know what the first investment will be. But it's the moment where this emptiness is actually the place where things are possible.
The continuation of that piece is the abyss is no longer your enemy. It is your womb. And I think so often we think of emptiness, of pain, of darkness as the absolute abyss we're never getting our way out of. But let's think of everything. Your best investment ideas, where do they come from? They came out of the dark. You know, the womb, when you're born, that was dark. Seeds grow from the soil, which is dark. All of the best stuff comes from the dark. That's why the picture was the tree growing out of the dark. And so once again, it's reorienting yourself to have a different relationship with some of these periods. A blank canvas is completely open. It's a complete exploration into what's possible, into infinity, essentially. And so all of a sudden, if you start changing your idea of what that emptiness you're feeling inside, or that pain, or that suffering, you realize what that can awake, what that can open up, and what can become because of that. And so it's just a different relationship, right? Where your attention goes, your life's going to go. If you want to focus on your emptiness, your sadness, your suffering, go ahead. If you want to start making that growth from the darkness to the light, then you're going to have to reorient your relationship. You know, what are you going to do with your pain? That's the answer to your path. And you can use that emptiness as the birth to the greatest canvas you've ever had, because tomorrow is completely unknown. So what do you want to do with it? And so it's just a different relationship with those types of moments. And if you can get comfortable with them, a tremendous opportunity for you to really paint something special.
It's fascinating how two people can look at the same thing and walk away with different conclusions, right? If you see a portfolio all in cash, it can be overwhelming. Where do I go from now? A family inherits a substantial amount, or somebody sells a business. But you could look at it, as you said, as a canvas of opportunity. What are we going to do with it? Especially if we have time to wait and see. Trees take time to grow, investments take time to perform. But if it's a blank canvas, I get excited. I feel like we can do things here. And but I can tell how, you know, a blank page it's almost this image in books and stories and movies, how a writer sits down and sees a blank page and he or she freezes and doesn't know what to do next. So I think it's very inviting to see this as, you say, purest form of possibility. It's blank. You can do whatever you want, and let's get started.
Well, this is touching on an even deeper theme, where these obstacles we create, They're invisible internal obstacles. And so we can start reorienting our relationship with them, like I said a minute ago, writing them and getting used to letting those internal scripts that feel like our absolute identity. If we can let them go, all of a sudden, amazing things start to happen. So I was working with one fund manager, fund closed down, 9-figure net worth, right? Considering 25 years before that was essentially poor. His world was in disarray when this happened. 9-figure net worth, world is in disarray. Can't imagine how he's getting out of bed tomorrow. I go rewind 25 years. I write you a check for 9 figures. What are you doing tomorrow? Living with joy, giving your unique gifts to the world, figuring out how you're going to make tomorrow freaking spectacular. And here you are complaining to me you can't get out of bed tomorrow because your ego hurts. This is one precious life. What are you going to do with it? And so it's just, how are you going to view life? What are you going to do? What are you going to create? How are you approaching this moment?
You're touching on something fascinating, and I think we can take it in so many directions. But what immediately I thought of when I heard you say that, nine figures, there's this idea that you can save a substantial amount of money and become financially independent. And I keep hearing stories from real people that reach that number, and they realize that they don't know what to do next, because that pursuit in itself gave them the purpose and meaning for the last 10 or 15 years, and they reached the number. But I think on that journey, they lost appetite and craving for everything else, because it was a time of sacrifice, a time of compromise, where you say no to many things so you can save so much. You say no to so many things so you can invest for the next 5 or 10, 15 years. So by the time you're at the end of that rainbow, you realize that maybe they lost the ability to appreciate what that money could do for them. And it's the same with clients I work with, that it's a good reminder that we're doing it not just to grow the number of zeros on the statement, but we're doing it so that this money can do something meaningful, important, positive in your life. And let's not forget on this long journey to develop all those other, interests, cravings, appetite. For lack of a better word, I'm thinking how somebody brought it up to me, how when they did those studies with marshmallows, with kids that, I'm sure you're familiar with it, that waited for the second marshmallow, he pointed out to me, and maybe we'll come back to me who said that to me, that those kids would wait for the third marshmallow and probably the fourth marshmallow. And he says the point is that that's not talked about, that yes, they've been successful in their careers and so on, and studies show, and I actually met 1 or 2 people from that research in real life at some event. The point is that they might never develop the appetite for the marshmallow. To keep it really, really playful and funny, how because you've been saying no to the marshmallow, once you have a box of marshmallows in front of you, you don't really have the craving for the marshmallow. And extrapolating that to accumulating financial wealth, or however where you want to look at it, you have to continue to develop the appetite to actually spend that, use it, right? Because the point of sitting on this 9 figures or 10 figures or 7 figures, whatever it is, that's not it. That's not the destination we talked about. How about you find a way also to enjoy it? I think it's important, and it gets lost. And in my profession, in my work, I don't want us to lose that, just to focus on the destination, but also once we're getting there, what are you going to do about it?
I mean, you nailed it, right? I mean, I essentially work with 3 types of people. I'm either working with investors, entrepreneurs, CEOs, or professional athletes. And so that competitive drive to get up here has been one of the main reasons that they've been able to get up here. Never satisfied, continually pushing, go faster, right? But what ends up happening is they think they are going to get here, like Matt Damon winning the Oscar, and they realize that's not enough. Because if you can't find those small wins throughout that journey and enjoy the actual journey, this destination will never reach. So if you're a year into a certain journey, you go, this has been a year of hell, there's been no subtle joys throughout this, then maybe that's not the right mountain you should be climbing. And that is a, visceral wake up for a lot of people. And I'm not saying that's in everyone's capacity current day to face that midnight moment like that, but you have to be aware that if you can't start condensing down that journey and find some of those celebration moments that you can actually enjoy, then there is not going to be some point that you're going to have some external metric provide that fulfillment, that joy, that need you're searching for, unfortunately.
One of the things we're searching, and it's a word that I really like, is freedom. And you bring it up in your book as well. You say that freedom is not something you chase, it's something you allow. Tell me more about that freedom, how you look at it.
Yeah. I think freedom, just go to the body. How do you know freedom? You feel it. You feel it. It's like truth, right? Like it vibrates at a different frequency. We were talking before. It's like when you got to search inside and find your own truth. Same thing for freedom. There's a lightness to it. It's very obvious to know when you're feeling it. Mm-hmm. And so much of the work I do with clients is heightening the internal awareness to understand where you're actually feeling freedom and experiencing that. And how do you cultivate more of that in your life? And so for me, freedom is more of a feeling state. And many of the times, like I said, it's not about adding more. It's essentially, in that poem, it talks about releasing the chains. Mm-hmm. You know, until you learn how to release your chains. And once again, these are invisible internal obstacles that we all have the ability to dismantle. Mm-hmm. You're not going to feel that freedom. So freedom is a feeling of lightness. Mm-hmm. So I try to get people to understand that feeling, even in subtle ways, very subtle ways to start. You know, it's almost like this thread, and you're slowly pulling this tether. And all of a sudden you pull a little bit further and you say, oh, all of a sudden I'm feeling a bit more freedom in my life. Mm-hmm. And then you pull a little bit further and you develop that relationship. I say that again and again. It's developing a relationship with freedom. Mm-hmm. And it's not about adding. It's about allowing. It's about letting go. It's about letting. I think some of the most gorgeous lines in all of the world are let go. Let go. And that can create so much freedom internally. And so a way to make this practical, this is just a personal practice that I do. A lot of clients have found success with this as well. When you're feeling that tightness, meaning lack of freedom, mm-hmm. for me, I start right in my belly and literally just alleviating a huge deep breath and just allowing that belly to relax and be free. Mm-hmm. And I found when I do that, that small little physical response all of a sudden has an impact on how my mental space is going to be. Mm-hmm. And that's about letting go. It's about releasing as opposed to adding more.
Freedom is one of those concepts. The more I think about it, the more I ask people about that, the more nuanced the term becomes. But I like the idea of just allowing it to come about and letting go. And when you think of financial freedom, to me, it means, choice and opportunity. You don't have to answer to anybody and so on. But just having that freedom and then appreciating that freedom, sometimes it's two different things. A lot of people have seemingly all that freedom. They don't know what to do with it. So I think it goes back to what we talked about. But freedom is this something that we can't really chase. And I like the idea of just allowing it. And I don't know, it really spoke to me the way you presented it, that maybe you already have more of it than you think. It's there. I want to tie it back to control over our lives. You write about it in your book. And when I think of freedom, one of the aspects is that I can choose how I live my life. But one of the things that I think is very helpful is how the stories we tell ourselves. And you have this quote, you say, you hold the power to reshape the narrative you once thought unchangeable. And it's a fascinating concept, and I'll let you speak, but how do you think about that idea of being in a position to change the narrative?
We've gotten so comfortable with these invisible scripts that someone else wrote for us and then we think are our truth. Mm-hmm. And we think they're set in stone and cemented. Mm-hmm. Let me bring up one of my favorite writers, Amor Towles. He wrote The Gentleman in Moscow. Mm-hmm. Just incredible writer. So he's probably one of the highest paid writers in the world. He spent 25 years on Wall Street. I think he went to the University of Virginia, and I forget the award he won or the fellowship he won, basically saying he's probably one of the greatest young writers we have on our planet. But his dad always wanted him to be in finance, so what did he do? 25 years he went down the path, but he always had that itch. I know this is somewhat of an extreme example, but he was following someone else's script that they wrote for him. And all of a sudden, 25 years into it, he realized he could rewrite it. He goes, yeah, I'm going to go be a writer. It was an invisible script he crafted. And the amazing thing is that you can start doing that in this moment. Speaking of freedom a minute ago, find where you're tight. Where's that tension point? Where's the thing saying, I have to do this? I have to be this person. I have to show up again here tomorrow. Who wrote that for you? And is there a way you can start navigating that script differently? Because our internal world, that's our experience. And you have the ability to rewrite that. And so one of the most important skills you can develop is, how do you do that? I heard a line one time I really liked that said, you should live, meaning in your mind, should be like a house with beautiful pictures on the wall. I thought that was incredible. Incredible. That's super profound, super basic, but really profound. Right?
Yeah.
What's the story I'm writing about today, about this moment? Those are the small type of micro moments. But let's zoom out. What is the trajectory of my entire life? What is the script I'm following? And what's the script I'd like to write? And how about I make it more in alignment with my deepest truth and start crafting that story? So that's why I wrote that. That's one of the most important skills I think we can develop, is how do you craft those internal dialogues and that internal script, and what do you paint in the future here?
And they're very powerful because it's a story that we hear again and again and again in our heads. You and I spoke about something, and I want to bring it up briefly, how I was asking that question. It was a conversation with a friend where I said, for a moment, if you take away everything that you're doing because you're making somebody else happy, your parents, your spouse, your friends, what's left? If you try to go down all the way to the layer that's not something that's you're doing for somebody. And you talked about this career in finance, the author that you brought up. If you strip all of those things away, you can get to the point that you bring up in your book, that a hidden part of you, maybe it's the voice that you haven't been listening to for a while, but that voice can tell you a lot more about what you really want. And if you're honest with yourself, are you doing what you're doing because your parents told you so, because a teacher told you you're good in biology, so you decided to study biology, and on and on and on. And you go all the way deep and you realize, I want to be a painter, or I want to be a singer, or I want to do something else. So it's fascinating to find it. And if you're already on the path, the same path, either, after all this exercise, that's even better. Like probably Dahlia was at some point realizing, I do want to do this for 60 years, but it's a fun exercise to have.
I would love to add to that. So I found in everyone I've ever worked with, there's usually just a handful of these stories that are invisible and we've been living into for decades. And so one of the great explorations you can do, what are these invisible stories, these invisible scripts that I've just lived into for so long now, I'm even completely unaware of. I call these convenient lies. It's the story we continue to live, but it's not our truth. It's a lie. And one of the great things you can do if you really want to shift tectonic plates in your life, meaning find more alignment for yourself, is really think about that. What is the story? What is the script I've been continuing to follow now, most likely for decades? And can I hold that up? Can I find out what that is first, right? We need the awareness first. And then do I have the courage to start rewriting that? Or maybe, like I said a minute ago, just letting that go. And so that's a very fun, that's a very deep exploration. If you really want to make, like I said, tectonic type changes in your life, really think about just those handful of scripts that somehow you picked up along the way and you've been continuing to live into. And that's some real deep work if you want to go there.
I love the sound of that. Sean, I want to ask you about a big word again, and the word is certainty, or lack of it. You write, your journey is not towards certainty. Certainty is too small for a soul like yours. This quote made me pause. What were you thinking?
Well, I'll dive in. What was your experience like with it?
Well, I feel like certainty is comfort. Certainty is safety. Certainty is just this place where I know what's next. And I think as humans, maybe it's evolutionary, I don't know, but we're looking for certainty. I know where the next meal comes from. I know where I can sleep tonight, from the most basic needs. But it's also, I know I have a job tomorrow, right? I know my spouse will be here tomorrow. So we're always looking for certainty. But speaking of that blank canvas before, there are moments where there is no certainty, but it just creates this moment of possibility. And bringing it back for a second to one simple example in my life, in the investing world, where I find an idea that makes sense, it's attractive, it's a good business, and it meets all the criteria. And I have to surrender this need for certainty because I don't know if this idea, if it works out, not all of them do, but if it does, if it's going to be a 2x or a 10x or a 100x, I don't know. But it's that kind of certainty, and I brought it up with Chris Mayer, who was on the show. He wrote a book, 100x stocks, and that we just don't know. If it's a good business, it could be a multiple of itself. And for me, it's an exciting uncertainty around it.
You nailed it. I mean, Bruce Lee, to change with change is the change of the state. You got to continue to evolve and adapt. And as much as we want certainty, unfortunately, 99% of our life is just a mystery. It's unknown. You didn't know that COVID was going to happen. All the positions to portfolio, you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. And so that idea is much bigger, right? We could revisit this and we could go down a deep well for decades talking about that singular concept. But the fact is that this life, most of it is a mystery. It's a leap off into the unknown. Mm-hmm. And you have to develop once again, relationship with that. Because if not, you're going to continue to fight. You're going to hope you get your relationships perfect. You're going to hope you get the perfect bank account, the perfect house, everything figured out and aligned just to your liking. And then guess what? Something's going to happen. It's going to fall on your plate. So you've got to learn to get used to that. And unfortunately, that's one of the challenges of this human experience is how do you actually end up both being aware of that and then getting comfortable enough in that. And I think that's a lifelong process. It's a lifelong journey to stay in that.
I think to me, certainty is a multi-dimensional concept, the same way as risk is. And I don't want to get into risk because I think that's a whole other big topic. But if you're uncertain where your next meal comes from, that's uncertainty that I'm not willing to accept. I want to rearrange my life in a way that I don't have to think about it, right? And the same way, I don't want to be thinking about where I'm going to sleep tonight. I want to know. And then there are big parts of our life where it's okay to invite extensive lack of certainty, in the sense that the upside can impress us. There's a certain investor that is a good friend of mine. We were having a conversation, and I'm not going to bring up who it is, but he's very successful, very comfortable at this point in his life. But the way we were talking, I asked him a question I thought was very personal, and that's why I'm not bringing up his name. But I asked him, are you afraid of being poor again? And I found that this was the kind of level of certainty that he was not willing to accept anymore at this point in his life. So when you're looking at a risk from a portfolio or investment choice perspective, there are certain risks that he's not willing to accept. I feel the same way. So I will not make an investment decision that would even put me anywhere close to the idea of being destitute, right? So I might make less or more money, it doesn't matter, but it's not a coin toss situation, right? It's not you put everything on white or black, or you flip a coin and it's a win or a lose. So it's the perception of certainty, and there are certain aspects of life that I do require some certainty. My meal, my place to sleep tonight, and there are places where I'm willing to accept some uncertainty. That's how I look at it. That's why it's not a linear yes or no. It's a much more multidimensional kind of experience. Sean, I want to ask you about love. You have a quote towards the end of the book. You say, love is a mystery, not because it hides, but because it doesn't need to be found. It just exists like the air you breathe, undemanding and essential.
Well, like the subtitle, there's no answers, right? There's no answers to any of this. And why do you love investing? I'm sure you can throw some words out there, and some of them might sound pretty good. But at the end of the day, you truly don't know. Why do I love my wife, and why did I fall in love with my wife? I don't know. I really don't know. But what I do want to know is, can I continue to develop that feeling state and living my life in alignment with that, and removing the obstacles, the internal blockages that are preventing me from experiencing that more often. And what I found over time is if you can slowly start disentangling and excavating away those layers, those blockages, those walls that so often we spend decades building because it's like armor for us. And we realize that's pretty lonely and there's a lot less love in our life. And then we can start removing those walls and those obstacles. All of a sudden, it feels like love starts entering our life. There's an appreciation element to life. All of a sudden, the trees outside start to look a little nicer. The sunsets we start to appreciate more. Those in our life, we hold space for them. We can be more present for them. And so I'm saying all that, but there really is not an answer there. You love certain things, and what I'm trying to do is excavate and remove any blockages and walls to allow more of that to enter into my life.
It's almost a state of being. It's right.
Can I add a line I love? I know I'm jumping in here, but David Brooks in his book, The Second Mountain, talks about spending an evening at a dinner with the Dalai Lama. And this was the exact line he said. He said, ebullience was his resting state. Just this state of bliss and joy and love and appreciation. I'm currently reading Pico Iyer's book. It's called A Flame, What You Can Learn from Silence, I think. He's a beautiful thinker. And he talks about spending time at this monastery out in California. And the way he describes some of these monks, just the joy that is bursting through them is absolutely remarkable. And I'm sure, I hope, that all of us have spent time in space with someone where you leave and you've been transformed because of their presence and the love and joy that is pouring out of them. And so, yeah, it's, I feel very, very early on a journey to try to allow more of that into my life and do everything I possibly can to remove the obstacles and the blockers to that. So I jumped in just to say, I love the visual. It goes into my head again and again around the Dalai Lama, and ebullience is his resting state.
It's funny that you brought up Pico Iyer, because I'm listening to his lectures now where he talks about being a pilgrim, a traveler, and reading his book, Life Well Lived or Half Life. I forgot the title, but it's snippets from different journeys that he's been on and his revelations. But I like his voice and I like the way he sees the world, and I enjoy his writing, so I can relate to that. The one thing I would add is that as an investor and as somebody that spends a lot of time in my head and using my brain, I grew to appreciate how much we can perceive the world in a way that's not with words or with books. And I'll bring up a quick story here. You know, speaking of investing, I got to meet a lot of managements of different companies I ended up owning over time. And I've been in meetings where I walk in and I walk away with a feeling that I trust these people. I know they will do the right thing, even if nobody is watching. And there's this essence of a couple of investors that talk about it. Vitaly Katzenelson talks about the soul in the game. And this idea that you're so in it, and this is your pursuit, that the monetary aspect, it's meaningful, but it's not the reason why you're running this business. And finding people like that and investing with them, along them, by buying shares in the companies they run, I think there's something to think about. And it might not be reflected in the balance sheet or in the official filings. It's just something you see. And Chris Beck talks about the quality, right? When we're in the presence of quality, we just know. And I think it's very difficult for a lot of people that come to investing from the mind and the brain side to appreciate that there are certain things you can't express in words, but you just know. And I think that's something I've been paying more attention to the second half of my career, that if you find a business or people that you just can trust and you want to have around you, whether they're your clients or managements of businesses you end up owning, there's something important to pay attention to.
A second, but I want to bring up one more thing about Pico. A few decades ago, the home he grew up in ends up burning down. He was in it, almost lost his life. I'm sure you've heard the story. And he wrote that evening, because he was a writer at that time, and he brings up an ancient haiku, and I'm not going to get the haiku completely correct, but I'll get it directionally correct. It's essentially the haiku saying, "Barn burned down, now I can see the moon clearly." And this is all we're talking about. You know, when pain hits your life, what are you going to do? How are you going to respond? Are you going to, go down that downward spiral, you're going to say, oh, I can see the moon. And it's this ebullience is his resting state. It's a way, it's an approach to the life, to the world, and more importantly, a state of being. So I just wanted to tie that into one of the stories I love Pico shares. And I'm actually seeing him talk with William Green next week. William Green did a beautiful podcast on the Richer, Wiser Happiness with Pico. I thought it was one of the most beautiful conversations I've heard. Back to what you were saying a minute ago. I'll sit down if I'm working with a fund manager and we're sitting down with the management team, and they'll bring in one of their younger analysts. And it's so funny and so interesting, the different subtleties that the experienced manager will pick up on that an analyst isn't even thinking about. Yeah. And the way I perceive that is because if that fund manager, has been able to still their internal waters, meaning they've removed their internal obstacles enough that they can see and pick up on truth much clearer than the young analyst who's thinking about ego, who has all of these little things. The more senior person who's done deep work, someone like a Dalio or a Marx, they can see reality so much clearer. And so you think, how does this tie to investing? If you are continually being blocked and battled through these internal stories, through these internal scripts, you're not seeing reality clearly. So if you want to both live a better life and do the craft of investing, if it's the craft for you, if it's your truth, if you want to do that, you have to find your still point. You've got to get to your essence that excavates and removes those internal blockages so that you can see in front of you clearly. And if you're not doing that, if you're not at that place, and we never reach that, it's a continual evolution, then you are not making the clearest decisions you can right now.
I love the sound of that. Sean, this was incredible, and we could talk for hours, but I think we touched on some of the highlights of the book. It's called When Life Begins to Whisper, A Journey Beyond the Answers. I highly recommend it. In every conversation we have, it's a joy, and I highly recommend for this audience to go back and to listen to the episode that we recorded a year ago. And I just want to thank you for today. This was wonderful. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Bogomil.
You were listening to Talking Billions. We talk about big ideas, big inspirations, big topics. We take on the hardest subject of all, money. But our conversations lead us to an even bigger question: what it means to live a rich life beyond money. If you enjoyed the show, please take a moment and follow, subscribe, rate, and share with friends and family. We rely on word of mouth to promote the show. One click for you means the world to us. Thank you. Until next time, your host, Bogomil Baranowski.